Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world, around the country, around the city. Welcome to another episode of the Silk Stockings Sisters podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Theresa J, Canada. And I'd like to talk about an issue today that's really of significance, not just to me, to maybe to other parents and people in this country, understanding how economics leads to a well-educated or economic situation. It leads to a well-educated populace and also a better economy for this country. So today's topic is socioeconomic status and its relationship to educational opportunity in New York City and other public schools from the 1960s to the present. So this will be like a lecture. I hate to say this is one of my lectures, but bear with me. It's not going to be too long. But I want to talk about this topic because I think it was not only was it important from 1960s to present, but it's going to be important beyond today and the future of this country and the future of the world, to be exact. So I'm going to be providing a lot of references and information that might be of value to you so that you can understand my seriousness about this topic. And I did say I would be talking about some economic issues related to the podcast, and this is one of them. And I think I mentioned it also in my book about the difference between the students that when we went to school, the PS6, the most significant difference was basically the socioeconomic background, the students there, as opposed to from my elementary school back in Harlem. And I'm pretty sure not much has changed to this day. As I showed the video about PS6 now, it's still considered a stellar school throughout the United States of America, not just in the city, I believe. So anyway, the first thing I want to talk about is the economic achievement gap in U.S. public schools. There's a huge economic achievement gap in United States public schools. The Ballard Center for Social Impact talks about that, specifically saying in public schools, lower income children are significantly less likely to succeed than their wealthier classmates. I'm not surprised. And much of this has to do with the fact that the lower income children don't have as many options as some of the wealthier children. And this goes back to my situation at PS6. There were students whose parents had chauffeurs picking them up from school. They had nannies waiting for them after school. So they had many of them had many of the economic wherewithal that people who lived in that community had and still do to this day. So that's not unusual. So socioeconomic achievement gaps is a huge problem in the United States. And I'll say more so about that later on because it relates to what happened prior to 1950s, 1960s up into now, with the key differences. So the other piece I want to mention is that, how does socioeconomic status affect education? Some people think it doesn't make a difference, but it does. The most common problem, this is from an article from the Penn Foster report from February 2024. The most common problems with children from low socioeconomic backgrounds are low attendance, irregularity, and dropout in between the academic session, meaning it's a school break or something. Now, this is what the article says. I'm not going to say I necessarily agree with everything they say. I want to share the information that the research says out so far. Their parents, they say, are typically not well educated, and they are unable to help their children in their studies. Now, this is a recent 2024 article. I have difficulty with this. I really do have difficulty with this because I'm thinking you would think that I know there's a widening gap economically in this country. I think everybody's aware of that because of the fact that there was inequity to begin with. So how can you reach a certain plateau when you've started you're way behind the starting point? So we all know about the inequities that exist in the different racial ethnic groups because of because of what discrimination took place. And I'll talk more about that later on. But that's important to know. But this is some of the research that's coming on. This is a 2024 report, the Penn Foster report. And it just basically talks about how socioeconomic status affects education. I'll talk more about it in a second. But also the American Psychological Association, because I talk a lot about how, if a child feels less valued emotionally, they're not going to be able to achieve or anything in school. I don't care how wealthy the child is or how poor the child is, quote unquote. But the education and socioeconomic status fact sheet that was produced by the American Psychological Association says that SES, socioeconomic status, that's the SES what stands for, is defined as educational attainment, financial security, income, and subjective perceptions of social status and social class. Let me repeat that. SES, socioeconomic status, as defined by the American Psychological Association as educational attainment, meaning how many years you went to college, or did you go beyond high school, post-college, master's, PhD, law, medicine. If you attain a certain educational status, that says a lot about your socioeconomic status. You have a certain financial security. If there's such a thing, and there's some people in this country who definitely have financial security. Your income, what your income level is, basically how much money you're earning per se. And they say subjective perceptions of social status is how people perceive people to be. For example, if they perceive that a person who's a dentist is going to have a certain kind of income and a certain kind of status within our society. All right. And social class. Now, social class basically is a combination, I believe, of certain factors. Your education level, where you attended school, what profession you pursued, your lifestyle, what you're able to do in your lifestyle of pleasure and relaxation. So that's also, I believe, part of social class, and that can be built over time. But just think before, some people started late in the process, so you can't expect them to be the same level as other people. But this is something why I think it's important to think about, because people think that everything's all the same now. No, it's not all the same. And it's going to be difficult to be all the same. So I'm going to go specifically over the end of life and socioeconomic status report that the American Psychological Association developed. I think I can't remember exactly what year. I think it's pretty recent in a sense. But let me just go through each of the categories. I just described the socioeconomic status for you, how that's being defined. Okay. And pretty much the fact that says that poverty specifically is not a single factor, but rather is characterized by multiple physical and social stressors. All right. So it's not just, oh, this person's poor, but it's also a mentality thing that goes with that as well. Right. So, and everything I'm talking about now is going to basically be about SES, socioeconomic status. Socioeconomic status affects our society. All right. How does it? Because if you have a low socioeconomic status and it's correlates, such as lower educational achievement, poverty, and poor health, effectively and ultimately affects our society. So inequities in health distribution makes a difference. The resource distribution of health care, quality of life, are supposed to be increasing in the United States and globally, but there's still some people who are left out. So society benefits from an increased focus on the foundations of social economic status and the inequalities that exist, and it affords its efforts to reduce the deep gaps in socioeconomic status in the United States and outside the United States. So this is very important, how socioeconomic status affects our society as a whole. And also, this report talks about the socioeconomic status and the end of life issues. Research basically talks about how our lives are to the end of our life, based upon our socioeconomic status. And, that goes back, how soon do you learn about terminal illness and what's happening with the racial and economic disparities that exist in our society, and the quality of life of people diagnosed with terminal illnesses. That's also important. So this particular information that we're talking about, the disparities in chronic and terminal illnesses, it's a huge gap. There are certain people, for example, research has found that the disparities in early detection of terminal illnesses among people or persons of varying socioeconomic status, it exists. So lower socioeconomic has been associated with less utilization of preventive and early detection services. That means that if you have a low socioeconomic status, you're less likely to be noticing or be aware of your health issues and be able to get the early detection that's needed to be able to work towards getting some resolution to your health concerns. So, you're you're more likely to die earlier because you're not able to get the information ahead of time. So that's about the disparities in chronic and terminal illnesses. And it's saying on average, this is some statistics they've come up with. It says on average, African Americans live 8 years less than Hispanic men and 6 years less than white men. And although African Americans may be more likely to seek out some screenings compared to white men, significant health disparities still exist, right? So between 2011 and 2012, only 58% of eligible low-income women ages 40 to 60 participated in free mammograms by the National Breast Cancer. So that says a lot right there. So that tells you people aren't even coming to get the treatment or coming to get the assessments that they need. And so basically, this is all very important then, to think about disparities that exist in our society now as we speak. So the next topic I want to talk about is the quality of life. As the end of life approaches, many individuals participate in advanced care planning. End of life choices, this is according to the American Psychological Association, can directly affect an individual's quality of life. So if you participate in certain kind of programs that's going to diagnose things sooner, then you're more likely to have a better quality of life instead of noticing it later, and your chances of success are lessen. Okay, so there's a different difference in terms of life expectancies and everything else that goes with that when it turns about socioeconomic status. So socioeconomic status and end of life is very important issues. So we need to start early on in our society instead of waiting later on. Okay, so this has a lot to do also with how socioeconomic status affects people's lives and their livelihood. And not just in schools, but in everywhere, because these are parents who are having these children. If the parents aren't healthy, how do you expect the children to be healthy, right? So the next topic and the next article I have is called the Washington Center for Equitable Growth. It's a 2014 article that talks about income equality affects our children's educational opportunities. That's an article if you want to get it. So I'm just mentioning the name of the article and the center that the Washington Center for Equitable Growth has published. And so in 2014. And basically it says wealth and income largely define the educational gap today, more so than race and ethnicity. So during the 1950s and 1960s, the opposite was actually true. Back then, racial discrimination in all aspects of life led to deep racial inequality. So what we're saying now is that the wealth issue is probably more prominent now than it was during the 50s and 60s. And that's what happened, like when I was in PS6 in the mid-60s, there was a gap. And I mentioned that, all the girls pretty much in the book mentioned about the significant amount of wealth that was observed by being at the school, as opposed to what it was like in their neighborhoods where they came from. And that's understandable because of discriminations that exist in our society, the racial discrimination that exists in our society. And that says a lot about what we can do now, or what we should be doing now, in terms of moving forward with some things instead of going backwards with some things. We need to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to have, to basically have an equitable society. So everyone has an opportunity to have a decent socioeconomic status, so that they then, in fact, can improve the educational opportunities for their children and other people's children. Okay, that's not just their children, but other people's children as well. So let me just give some information that came out of this particular article. The article talks about building a strong foundation. That's the foundation, strong foundation for the U.S. economy. Very important piece. Okay, very important piece. So it's saying one of the clearest manifestations of growing economic inequality in our nation today is the widening educational achievement gap between the children of the wealthiest and the children of everyone else. Okay. All right, that's huge. So after all, wealthier families are able to afford expansive private schools or homes in wealthy public school districts with more educational resources. So that's why you're going to see more and more of a gap. But basically what they're saying is that in this article but a closer look at this education achievement gap over the past 50 years or so shows that the gap only began to widen in the 1970s. right about the time that wealth and income inequality in our nation also began to grow. So they've seen a sustained rise in inequality in wages, income, and wealth, leading to more and more income and wealth um, disparities in the society, in this country. So this article is very interesting, talks about what has happened and what happens with the growth of socioeconomic achievement gaps, which apparently appear to be largely more affluent parents are increasingly investing more time and money in their kids' educational enrichment and earlier periods in children's lives, and hard-pressed low-income parents invest in their children has grown sharply over the past 4 decades among both affluent and non-affluent parents. So, it's saying to you that there's a widening socioeconomic gap, and what people can do who have more resources are different from those who don't have the resources. But like I said, during the 50s and 60s, and when I was in the mid 60s and beyond, when I was in school, it was a gap, but not the way it's a gap now. But at that time, it's now becoming more of an income inequality in our society is affecting the educational outcomes and opportunities available for children in our society. So that's going to be a huge thing in terms of how does this country deal with that? Because if you don't have an educated society in all different aspects, who's going to be able to produce different things, come up with different ideas, and explore different options for increasing the productivity, enhancing education, enhancing the kinds of opportunities people can have, and have a more sustained society. That's very, very important. So the next and final piece I want to talk about is the factors that cause socioeconomic gaps in education. This was apparently a summary given by the Education Conference 2.0, and it's titled "The Impact of Socioeconomic Inequality in Education: How to Rise Beyond Educational Disparities." So apparently it's a global conference they have, I think, every year. I'm not familiar with it, but it's just I want to share with you what some of the factors they come up with and let you know what they say based upon, different kinds of experiences that people who've done researchers have been to their educational summits have said. So they're saying that inequitable access to education in the United States, owing to family socioeconomic position, has been the subject of public debate and education research for years. All right, that's a given. So basically, there's a lot of discussion. Education systems often strive to raise the performance of underprivileged pupils and close the achievement gap between low and high socioeconomic students. The absence of measurable advancement over time is constrained, though. Since the 1960s, these patterns and correlations have significantly increased the achievement inequalities by socioeconomic class, particularly between children at the upper end of the income distribution and everyone else. Everyone else. So, what are the factors that cause socioeconomic gap in education? According to this article, there are many causes for this, such as family history, wealth and resources, educational support, etc. All right. So the first thing is disparities in funding. Schools in low income typically have fewer resources than those in higher income communities. All right. So that's why many people move to certain neighborhoods with certain socioeconomic status. So they know those schools are going to be, even their public schools are going to be better. And they still have private school options for those who have the wealth. But people who don't have the wealth, their options are only public schools. All right. And so therefore, whatever the public schools like, that's what they're going to get. And public school funding is lower in those schools, districts that have lower socioeconomic status parents who live in that community. Go figure. All right. So therefore, you're not going to have the same resources or everything else that exists in other communities that are basic, like what happened to me in PS6. We didn't have resources in my elementary school from PS 157. Basic stuff. You just barely go to class, get your notebook, do your work, and come home. Whereas PS6 had a plethora of different kinds of the kitchens, they had chorus, they had the band, they had orchestra, and you all had an instrument, and you played an instrument, everybody. Okay, and you were I rented a violin, I played the violin. Yes, I played the violin and played it pretty well. But I'm just saying, I played the violin, and everyone who attended had to learn to play an instrument, I believe, and or join the chorus. So I wasn't singing. You don't want to hear me sing. Okay, so I'm just saying, but I played my violin, so that gives you some indication of the kinds of standards that were set in the schools that have higher socioeconomic people who live within those communities, right? So that's disparities in funding for the schools. Okay, now teacher caliber, a big issue. Big issue. I mentioned before about my Black teachers and what happened during the era. Most teachers who taught in basically urban areas that most Black and Puerto Ricans lived in were teachers who were either Black or Puerto Rican, or they were teachers who were coming in because they were either not as qualified, all right, or they were trying to go to certain schools because at that time you could pay off your student loans if you worked in a quote unquote underprivileged school for at least 3 years. And once the 3 years were up, they were gone. All right. And they went to the suburban schools where they lived. They lived probably in the suburban schools, or they lived in areas that, maybe New Jersey or whatever. So they wouldn't have to deal with coming into Harlem areas or East Harlem. Okay. So that was the thing about the caliber of teachers. So most teachers of high caliber are more likely to work at schools with more resources and money, leaving the low income schools with less qualified, less efficient, teachers. And that's what happened. Now, but I'll tell you, in terms of Black teachers, I mentioned one of my other episodes, the Black teachers really didn't have much of a choice. They were mostly assigned to the neighborhoods where mostly Black and Puerto Rican and low income students actually attended the schools. That's where they taught. There wasn't a single Black teacher in PS6. And I don't know if there's, well, at least it wasn't when I was there. Okay. And I don't think there are too many, much more diverse now than it was then. So that says a lot about the family, basically teacher caliber, the caliber of teacher who's teaching. So if this person is a new teacher right out of school who doesn't have as much experience, as opposed to a teacher who's been seasoned for 5, 6, 10 years of teaching already, they're going to have more information to be able to educate the children with a different kind of appeal. So that's the caliber of teaching is a big issue that causes, that deals with the factors that cause socioeconomic gap in education. The other one is family history and background. Key point. According to this article, children from low-income homes frequently lack the resources and assistance needed to excel in school. And that's so true. We look at this most recent situation with the COVID and people have stayed home. These children don't have necessarily internet at home. They don't even have a computer. They don't have a phone that they can even work on. So how do you expect them to compete with their cohorts in schools that other children have all the resources they need to be able to work on the assignments they need to have completed? All right. That's a huge situation. That's a huge difference. So basically, if you don't have access to some of this, how can you expect to be able to perform and be able to excel, right? You can't obtain the homework assignments, assistance from parents who are working long hours. My parents will work at night, or they work long hours, so the children at home for alone, and they have it with a sitter or a grandparent or something watching them, and so no one's really assisting them with their help. All right, no one's assisting them, or if they were, they may not have the information they know to be able to assist in the first place. A certain type of math that's maybe out. The parents may not know. They may not have the exposure, so they're not able to help, and they may not have the resources to even hire a tutor. So some people don't have the wherewithal. They don't have the background, but they have the resources to be able to purchase, hire a tutor to help their child. I had a tutor when I was a PS6. I was taking a specialized test, and the recommendation was to, get a tutor. I think I had a tutor in math. Anyway, I had a tutor. Okay. And I came from Harlem. Okay. So my mother specifically said, whatever it took, she was going to make sure that she gave me every opportunity to be able to excel and to be able to achieve. And I thank her. My father said, okay, whatever. My father just, he went along. Dad just went along. Okay. He was a designated driver, as one of my friends said when we were in PS6. He drove all, we always had a car. But, when the kids would invite us to the parties who lived in Park Avenue, which was a very exclusive community in New York City and Manhattan, my father would drive us to the parties because, we had a car. Most parents, would take in public transportation. So we always had a car. So my father would pick up one of my friends, and two of us would go out. I think it was usually two, just using one other friend. I don't think it was more than one of us. More than two of us would go together, and we'd go to the parties. So my father, that was his role that he served in terms of supporting what I was doing at PS6. Just want to put that out there. Now, also another factor that may impact the socioeconomic gap in education, of course, is discrimination and prejudice. Now, I mentioned before that, during the 50s and 60s, it was much more discrimination because of the actual segregation laws and so forth and so on. So now students from racial, ethnic, minority group, I don't like the term minority groups, and other racial, ethnic groups, and those who identify LGBTQ plus are more likely to suffer discrimination and prejudice in schools, which has had a negative impact on their academic performance, and raises their dropout rates as well. So, children who, end up being bullied or stereotyped, basically they're, like to find ways to avoid going to school or avoid education if they don't feel secure in the environment. So that's something to take in consideration. That's happening even more so now than before. I mean, kids used to play hooky, I guess, back in the day. I mean, I don't know about 8, 9-year-olds, but I'm just saying, if you are presented with a teacher says that you're stupid or whatever, why would you go to school? Why would you show up? So that is some things that may occur and may, cause children not to go. They want to go someplace that they feel they're going to be welcomed. So cultural disparities is another reason. Differences in cultural norms and beliefs might influence how students from various socioeconomic backgrounds approach their education. Every type of different cultures see education as either favorable, not necessarily favorable. It just all depends. It depends upon one's cultural background. For example, some kids, like, if you grow up poor, you're like, well, I can get the fast money. If I can get the money real fast, that's good enough for me. If I can do it without getting an education, that's fine. I mean, you see a lot of that. There's definitely a lot of that during the late 70s, early 80s in New York City, for sure. Okay. But I'm just saying that's something that's something that comes up. So they got to take care of their families or whatever. They're like, I can't stay in school for so long. So I got to get out of here because it's not helping my family. All right. But then the other, like, for example, there are other things that come about that parents feel, well, without getting a college education, my child doesn't have a chance. So they want to make sure their child has a good education, K through 12, so they will have the opportunity to actually apply and attend college. So that's important to them. So, many of these people feel like, they want to get out of the poverty. They figure this is an opportunity to get out of being in this roller coaster, really the carousel of poverty. All right. So, instead of starting a shorthand business for instant means of money is a better option in such cases. Okay. So how does socioeconomic inequality impact education? It's a big talk. We talk a lot about this in education, believe it or not. At least we should be. But there should be global conferences, not just in the United States, around the world, but in the United States in particular. And in the North, there's, at one point, you look at the North and South. I focus on this podcast on what's happening in the North and Midwest, and it's different than what took place in the South. And you need to understand that because there were basically, the migration to the North, that was a big deal, and people were able to find, jobs in the cities, the factory jobs and so forth. I call it the, what do you call, I can't even think of the name of the type of jobs. Civil service jobs. You could take a test and you pass. You get, usually get the jobs, but you couldn't necessarily get into those union shops because they discriminated you from becoming a union person. So that was a big deal back in the 50s and 60s. So, but basically, inequality still impacts education. You have low income students frequently, restricted access to educational resources, including books, computers, and so forth, as I mentioned earlier. So access to resources is a prime example. School quality. If you graduate from a certain school in New York City, you can forget about even thinking about going to college. Even if you graduate, your chances of them, because you're starting out, not having all the actual information or required subjects that have taken to be able to be admitted to a quality education, get a quality education in college. So that's also important. So school quality is important, and because you don't have instructors who are teaching certain subjects. All right. AP classes in high school, advanced placement classes in high school. I was in advanced placement history. Maybe I should have been teaching history instead of what I'm teaching at university, but I loved history. I still love history. That's why I talked about my book is a historical piece. It's a historical book. Duh. So yeah, so that's where the education and historical stuff comes in play. So also health and nutrition is also, how does socioeconomic inequality impact education? Health and nutrition. Poor health and nutrition can have a substantial impact or influence on academic achievement. If you're hungry, that's why many schools have a breakfast and a breakfast program, because they're kids who come to school to get food to eat, the substance. So if they're not eating, they're not able to eat. How are they going to pay attention in school and focus on doing any schoolwork in school or even at home? So, children who go through this, it's basically, a situation where the academic achievement is a result of poverty and socioeconomic inequality. That's what happens. So for students in low-income schools, this may be a poor standard of instruction and fewer possibilities for academic and personal growth. Okay, so in terms of health, I said before, malnourished or ill students, because you could be ill because you haven't been eating properly, you don't have the right kind of foods, nutritious foods at home, and they are more likely to miss class, or to miss out on class, or to miss parts. So there's a gap in terms of what they're learning, and they have problems paying attention to school and do poorly academically and sleeping. Plus it's probably maybe have no heat at home, and they come to school because there's heat in the school, and they'll go to sleep because they finally get a chance to sleep. They probably couldn't sleep at night at home because it was so cold. They were probably awake because they couldn't sleep. So these are things people don't think about, but this is a real thing that happens in people. This is not something that's made up in storybooks. All right, this is not a fake movie. This is a real life situation. Okay. Stress and trauma. Just getting to school can be traumatic. You have to pass through certain places to go to school. That can be traumatic. All right. So basically, they're saying low income students. Now, I'm not using any ethnic ground here. There's a lot of low income people who don't necessarily have the standardized stereotypal situation people see as being low income students. So low income students are more likely to encounter stress and trauma, including being exposed to violence, which affects their academic performance. They sometimes have more anxiety, more depression, and other mental health conditions, which can make it challenging for them to be able to excel in school. And chronic stress and trauma can also cause these conditions. And as a licensed professional counselor, I know that's the case. I see some of that, and I've seen some of that in my former clients. How are you going to tell me about school when I'm physically abused by, I'm getting beat up, getting, beat every night because I didn't do my chores or whatever reason. It's a lot of things that the violence takes place in the neighborhood, in the home, everywhere, even, if you take the subways, you got to take the subways. There's a lot of stuff happening on the public transportation, and just walking the streets, wherever you are, just walking the streets. Okay. That can occur. The violence is something going to happen. So it's everywhere. It's everywhere. So the other thing is limited opportunities. Okay. Due to financial limitations, students from low-income households may only have a small number of possibilities for post-secondary education. And that was true then, and it's even more true now. This might reduce their chances for advancements in their careers and prolong the cycle of inequality and poverty. So it's going to continue the cycle. You can have a parent who was educated, but now that same child of a parent who was educated is no further along than that their parent was when they did it 40 years ago. And that's my concern. That's why I'm trying to share information so people can understand what is really going on and what we have to do to make a difference, to change some of these directions. Okay. So we need for a way for fair education in our society. Fair education is essential for inclusive, peaceful, and long-term growth of a society because it provides equal opportunities for all individuals to learn, grow, and pursue a good life with jobs to sustain themselves and contribute to society. Okay. And education plays an important role in all of these areas of society and is most responsible for development of civilizations as we know it. Where would I be without my education? That's the question. Where would I be without my education? I'm not even going to think about it. But I want to make sure other people have this opportunity so they can have a better life or more fulfilling or just basic standard life. It doesn't have to be really a fluent life per se, but just to have a decent life and have the basics, as Maslow calls the baseline: food, clothing, and shelter. Okay, the Maslow pyramid. Maslow's theory. It says a lot about what the basic human being is to have. And the basic foundation: food, clothing, and shelter. If you don't have food, clothing, and shelter, the rest of stuff up the pyramid, It's not going to get, it's not, if you do, it's going to be scattered. You're not going to be, it's not going to be consistent. It's not going to be consistent. All right. So I'm just saying that these are the things I think are important now that we have to focus on as a society, not just individually in a city in the north, everywhere, but specifically, I think, in the major cities, because a lot of the jobs that parents had back in the 1960s and early 70s are gone from the cities. You don't have the manufacturing plants in Detroit like they don't have the car manufacturers trucks they had like in Detroit back in the day. Many of those went out into the suburbs. And who lived in the suburbs? Hello. So I'm just saying to you as a whole, a lot has changed, and we have to find a way to make sure that, we can provide everyone an opportunity to learn and pursue a good life with jobs or careers or businesses that can help them sustain themselves and help them grow and help enhance our society for everyone, not just for some, but for everyone. So after this, lecture here, that's my lecture piece for today on socioeconomic situation of and what has happened from PS6 to now. And I'm hoping that we can go into a higher ground here instead of having to always go back and go back and go back and start again from the start. We cannot continue to do that if we're going to be a prosperous society. And if America is going to be a prosperous country. And it's not just for some people, it should be for all people. So having said that, thank you for listening and hopefully learning from what I'm sharing with you about issues on my podcast. I think that are pertinent to our society and to everyone. Okay, for everyone. And that's the intention for the podcast, to share information so people can learn and grow and develop and take it from where it is, and they can go with it someplace else if they want to. But that's it for today. And thank you for consider subscribing to the channel, write comments, just whatever it has to do. If you see something that you like, you want to see something else, write in the comments something you want to hear about, and I'll be able to try to follow up on that if and when I can. So until next time, enjoy the rest of your day, rest of your evening, rest of your night, wherever you are around the world. And I'll see you in the next episode of the Socioeconomic Sisters. Bye now.